Ok, mi chiamo Medinde Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan Eneye Heru Da AKANFO NANASOM Da. That means greetings. My name is Kwesi Odwirafo Kwesi Nehem Ptah Akan. Today is Heru Day, AKANFO NANASOM Day, ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion. We'll be getting into Bena today. Before we start with Bena, we want to ask if anybody had any questions about the previous session on Abena. Send me a chat, send me a message to see if you had any questions on that last session talking about Abena, about Sekhmet. And give me 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, no questions on Abena? Alright, so let me first put a link up there. Okay, give me just 1 second. Okay, so no questions on Abena. So we're going to move into Bena, this is the fourth Akradin Abosom. Of course, the Akradin Abosom are the Abosom, the deities, the spirit forces in creation, goddesses and gods, those specific Abosom who govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the Akan 7-day week. So we talked about Awusi, who is called Asar in ancient Kemet. We also talked about Adjua, who is called Aset in ancient Kemet. We talked about Abena, who is called Sekhmet in ancient Kemet. And today we're going to talk about Bena. There are 11 Akradinbosom, that govern the solar, lunar, and planetary bodies that govern the 7-day week. So we're going to deal with Bena today. Bena governs the planet, or Ochin Nsoroma, that's the term for planet in our Akan culture. Bena governs the planet Bena. That planet is called Mars in English. So Bena is the Abosom, the male divinity that governs the planet Bena. And that particular planet, that Ochin Nsoroma, governs the day that we call Benada, or Bena's day, which is Tuesday. It's also called Abenada, or Abena's day, which is Tuesday, because she's the major female Abosom who governs that particular Ochin Nsoroma, or that particular planet. So we talked about Abena last week, we talked about Bena this week. Bena in ancient Kemet is called Heru Behudet, or Heru Behudet, also Heru Behudet, which is one of the derivations of the name Bena. In Akan culture, it comes from Heru Behudet, or Heru Behudet. So when you see the image of Heru Behudet, or Heru Behudet, it's typically, very often, sometimes he's a hawk-headed divinity, sometimes he takes the form of a jata, or a lion, and sometimes he takes the form, very often, which you see all across ancient Kemet, of the winged celestial orb. It's the winged sun disk. Sometimes it's the planet Bena, it's a red disk. Sometimes it's the sun, the Aten, because the sun sometimes takes on a red color. But sometimes it's the planet Bena. and it has wings. Sometimes you'll see the wings without the planet or without the sun. Sometimes you'll see the wings with the disk right in the middle, and that's Bena. So in the major texts dealing with Bena, in Jeba, which is also called Edfu, EDFU, often when you read the text, the translations, you'll hear about, it's talking about the legend of Heru Behudet. And it talks about Ra being ruling creation, and then some disordered individuals began to try to attack and destroy creation, and then Ra sends out Heru Behudet, and he takes the form at that particular point as the winged celestial orb, and he sails down from the boat of Ra and begins to slaughter, massacre the enemy. And Tahuti is in the boat, the Abosom, male Abosom of divine wisdom, and he directs Heru Behudet to different aspects of the warrior ship. He directs him to different aspects of the war. Whenever the enemy is congregating and staging a counterattack, Tahuti directs Heru Behudet, and when Heru Behudet destroys the enemy and slaughters them, and very often in the text it will say Heru Behudet, when he slaughtered the enemy, he did not leave one enemy left alive. So he slaughters them, and then Tahuti praises Heru Behudet, and Ra praises Heru Behudet, and they give Heru Behudet a number of different titles. So as you're reading through that text, and we have that text cited in the article about Bena. The name of the article is Bena, the Abosom of Bena and Benada. It's on the Akradinbosom page. So we cite that article, and it's also in the MMARA part 2. Part 1, well, it's part 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but in parts 1 through 3, you'll find that text cited. So as they're going through, and as Heru Behudet is waging war against the enemy and destroying and killing and massacring the enemy for Ra, Tahuti and Ra praise Heru Behudet and honor him with names of cities and different titles for us to call Heru Behudet, different ritual practices. There's a section of the text where he goes into Mesen, and Mesen is the iron foundry city. So after he wages war on behalf of Ra, wipes out the enemy, then it is decreed that the followers of Heru Behudet, who are blacksmiths, divine blacksmiths with their tools, their iron tools and their iron weapons, they will create metal statues of Heru Behudet as part of the shrine work. So here you have Heru Behudet, this Abosom, waging war for the creator of the universe and the creatress of the universe, the Abosom of divine wisdom, not only honoring Heru Behudet along with Ra, but also you'll see in the text and in the vignettes associated with the text, you'll see Tahuti himself with chains and ropes around the necks of the enemies, preparing them for the slaughter. So the Abosom of divine wisdom, male, the male divine wisdom, just like you have Tahuti, the male divine wisdom faculty, the Abosom of divine wisdom, the spokesperson, male of Ra. You also have Tekit, which is the great female divine mother of divine wisdom and spokesperson of Ra and Ra'et. So in this particular text, you have Tahuti, the Abosom of divine wisdom, also called Ifa or Orumila in the Yoruba tradition. This Abosom of divine wisdom sanctions the slaughtering of the enemy, the massacring of the enemy, all of the enemy, cut down, no compromise, no mercy, slaughters them all, sanctions that, honors Heru Behudet, honors his followers, directs his followers to establish shrines for Heru Behudet, and details the kinds of statues that Heru Behudet will operate through and communicate with them through, names cities and different regions after Heru Behudet. And the Abosom of divine wisdom also is holding the enemy by the necks with ropes and chains, preparing them to be slaughtered, some of them on the boat of Ra. So that's divine wisdom sanctioning Heru Behudet. Heru Behudet is the male Abosom, the male agent, principal agent of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. Now, we talked about divine hate last week. We went into detail, so we're going to go over it just briefly again. Nyamewa, Nyame, Nsheshe, that means divine order. Nsheshe in our Akan culture means ordinances, rules, established order. She means to fix. She means an intensive fixing, fix, or a deliberative fixing. Nsheshe means an arrangement or an order. Nyamewa is the great mother. Amenwa, Amenet. Nyame is the great father, which is called Amen in ancient Kemet. So Nyamewa, Nyame, the great mother and the great father, supreme being. Nsheshe, their order or arrangement, is the divine order. Divine order is composed of two complementary poles. Law, which is also the proper understanding of love, and hate. So we have law and hate, love and hate. Law is the expansive pole of divine order. Hate is the contractive pole of divine order. Law itself, that expansive pole, is governed by two major divinities. Ma'a, the Abosom, male Abosom of law and balance, and Ma'at, the female Abosom of law and balance. When you're expressing love, you're actually expressing law. And we went into the etymology of the term love and law and so forth in ancient Kemet, and where it comes from in English, and we trace it all the way back to our culture, and we showed that, for example, in ancient Kemet, in the Coptic dialect, the term for law, meh, is also the term for love, meh, and that's because law and love in our culture is the same concept. When you're in love or showing love, you're showing law, you're interacting in harmony with divine order with respect to that object, thing, or entity. So that's the expansive aspect of divine order. Law is the instrument through which you attract balance to your life. And when you attract balance to your life, your sphere of influence expands. That's why law is the expansive pole of divine order. Then you have hate, which is the contractive pole of divine order. Hate is rejection. Hate is shutting down disorder. Divine hate is the divine rejection of disorder for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of the divine order. So when you have law, you expand. It's like when you breathe in air, you're breathing in nutrients, but sometimes toxins also get inside your system. But you're expanding when you're breathing in air, taking in those nutrients. But then your immune system contracts and destroys and rejects and expels the toxins to maintain the integrity of the divine order. And the immune system cells are the agents of the immune system. They are the agents of the system that rejects disorder for the purpose of maintaining the divine order. They are the agents of chi. And law and hate in the three languages, MMARA, net chi. Law and hate. Chi means to hate, to abhor, to reject. We also showed last week the etymology of the term hate. And we'll get a little bit more into that today, but Heru Behudet and Sekhmet together are the expansive and contractive pole of the divine hate of the Supreme Being. They are the divine immune system within the great divine body of Supreme Being. So just like we have a body as Afurakani people, you have an immune system. Sometimes they talk about the immune system and the lymphatic system separately. They're really two poles of the same reality. So Sekhmet operates through that lymphatic system. Heru Behudet operates through the immune system. So those two together, that's your immune response. We have an immune system just like the great divine body of the Supreme Being has an immune system. And the immune system of the Supreme Being is governed by Heru Behudet and Sekhmet, Bena and Abena. Now in the body, first let me say Heru Behudet has titles. For example, Heru Heri Ket. And we talked about Ket being corrupted from Ket or Het, also Ked or Hed. It became corrupted into Kedos in Greek. That's the Greek corruption. And then the Kedos became Het or hate in English. And we showed that Hed and Het in ancient Kemet, also pronounced Chet or Chi in ancient Kemet, became Chi in Akan, which means to hate. Et Chiwadie means the adie, things, objects, deeds, or entities that are Chi, hated by the Abosom, so that's divine hate. We showed that Ket or Het is a title of Heru Behudet, meaning Het or hate is in the name of Heru Behudet. He's called Heru Heti Ket, or Heru, the chief of Het, or Kate, or destruction, or divine destruction. He's the chief of hate. So hate is a divinity. There's a male divinity of hate. There's a female divinity of hate. Heru Behudet and Sekhmet, Bena and Abena. Now inside the body, Bena operates through the immune system. Bena, by the way, is called Ogun in Yoruba culture and Ogu in Vodou, Ikenga in the Igbo tradition. So he operates through the immune system. If you look at your immune system, the lymphocytes and the erythrocytes that are developed within the bone marrow, you'll find that just like inside your body, the bone marrow, inside the bone, your bones are like the stony part of your body if you relate it to the earth mother. Inside the Asase Afuya, the earth, you have a core, then you have an inner core, and you also have an inner core. Now inside, the core itself is a liquid core, comprised mostly of iron. But it's a liquid core, iron nickel alloy. Inside the inner core, it's more of a solid iron, and then the inner core has iron in a crystalline form and so forth. So inside that inner core, you find the iron. Inside the core, or the stony part of your body, is the bone marrow, and there you'll find the erythrocytes being generated, the lymphocytes being generated. We talked about that last week with respect to Abena. She wears red and white. So the red blood cells and the white blood cells are inside that system. So we showed how, just like her name is associated with that, and her regalia is associated with that, and her energy is associated with that, the same is true of Heru Behudet. You'll often see Heru Behudet wearing the red and the white crown, especially in the text of Edfu and the images in Edfu and that temple in Jebba. You'll see Heru Behudet. He's also called Heru or the Heru the Great, distinct from Heru, the son of Alsar, and the son of Alset. These are two different Abosom, by the way. Some people are teaching, which is totally false, that Heru Behudet is just the form of Heru, or the form that Heru, son of Alsar and son of Alset, takes when he's fighting against Set. And that's totally inaccurate. That just shows that people don't really understand the Abosom and are not really communicating with these Abosom. Heru Behudet is one divinity. Heru, son of Alsar and Alset, is a different divinity. To say that Heru, son of Alsar and Alset, morphs into Heru Behudet when he's fighting Set, that's like saying Shango morphs into Ogun when he's fighting against Eshu. Or in Akan culture, Yao morphs into Bena when he's fighting against Anansi, and that's totally ridiculous. So, but getting back to the association with the body, inside the bone marrow, the erythrocytes and the lymphocytes, the red blood cells and the white blood cells are created. We talked about that with Abena, but inside that core, where the iron is, you'll find Heru Behudet. Now we talked about in that text, talking about Heru Behudet, it was decreed that metal statues be made of Heru Behudet, and he operates through those specific ritual items. The reason for that is Heru Behudet, or Bena, he is the Abosom of hot metal. He's the Abosom of war. He's the Abosom of war with regard to fire. The planet Bena is shown depicted as a red planet in ancient Kemet. It's called Heru Behudet, sometimes meaning the red Heru. That's because when you see the planet Bena, that they call Mars, it often has that red tint, and it's representative of war, of fire, of destruction, divine hate. So that's all connected to Bena. His name, one of his titles is Bede in Akan. Bede, Ben means to boil, to become reddened by boiling or by fire. Or Ben Fo is a title of a group of people, Fo, who are Oben, well fired, meaning people who are well tested, battle tested, but also that term recently has been given to professors because people who are considered intelligent are well fired or thoroughly fired or well tested or battle tested. They've been through the fire and come out on the other side intact. So they have experience, they have wisdom, they have knowledge. So Ben means to become red by boiling. Bene means red. Bene Fo means those who strike or fight. So Bene, Bede, and of course Bera. Then you have in ancient Kemet Heru Behudet, Heru Bedet, which is Bede, Heru Beda, which is Bena. So Heru Behudet, Bena, red, fire, destruction of disorder in the body. That's the destruction of cancerous cells, the destruction of microbes that are invading the body. The destruction is dependent on the level of iron in your blood. If you don't have enough iron in your blood, then you won't have enough oxygen, and the oxygen actually carries the life force energy, the fire, that can wage war against the cancerous cells. We all know that if you have iron poor blood, then that's anemic, or you have anemia and you become weak. You need that iron so you can carry the oxygen, which carries the fire. That iron is actually Heru Behudet's domain within the body. And even though the whites and their offspring have just recently realized that the specific major proteins that support, regulate the levels of iron in the body, they just discovered that the white blood cells actually produce the most important protein that regulate the levels of iron in the body. That protein is called hepcidin, I believe. And you can look that up. So that's a new discovery for them. For us, we've always understood that Bena, Heru Behudet, the Abosom of iron, the Abosom of war, the Abosom of hot metal, the Abosom of fire, the Abosom of divine hate, destruction of disorder, waging war against the enemies of Ra, the enemies of Ra'et. He's an iron divinity, and he operates through the bone marrow where the white blood cells and red blood cells are made and the immune system cells are generated and sent out to the rest of the system. So we always understood that Heru Behudet in ancient Kemet dealt with iron. Of course, Ogun is the Orisha of war and iron. Same thing with Ogu in Vodun. In Akan, it's the same thing. Bena, of course, we talked about red, Ben meaning to become red by boiling. But a title of an iron caster or iron casting in Akan culture is Gu. Gu means to cast iron or to cast metal. Ogufo are the people, Fo, that group of people who cast metal, Gu. So the Ogufo are the metal casters. That is a title, an appellation of Bena, Ogufo. Just like we have AKANFO, which means Akan people, and we have Akani, which means an Akan individual, you have Ogufo, which means the Ogu or the iron casting or metal casting Fo people. The singular would be Oguni, which would be an individual who's a metal caster. Oguni, that would be an Akan. That's an appellation, of course, of Bena, the Abosom of hot metal. It's the same, of course, Oguni would be Ogun in Yoruba and Ogu in Vodun. In every system, not only are the names related, Heru Behudet is also called Heru Akuti. Aku is where you get the Agu, the fire title from. Herakuti is just a title of Heru Behudet. He's dealing with fire, operating through the sun or through that red planet, operating through metal. Ra decreed that metal statues of this divinity will be fashioned so that his followers can communicate with him through those metal statues. It was also decreed that his followers, who were blacksmiths, who you had weapons of spears of iron and chains and so forth, there will be images made of them as well. So you have statues of iron, of metal, for the followers of Heru Behudet and for Heru Behudet himself. In Akan culture, the same divinity, Behudet or Bedet or Bedat, becomes Bena, and he's also called one of the Ogufo, the head of the Ogufo. He's the metal caster. So all of that is connected. And then inside the body, the red blood cells and white blood cells dealing with the iron, your immune system response is the efficacy of the immune system response is dependent on the level of iron in your blood. Without that iron, you're not able to wage war, you're not able to preserve order. You become not only weak because you don't have enough iron in the red blood cells, but because the white blood cells produce that protein that regulates the level of iron in the body. If that's not working properly, then your immune system doesn't work either. So not only are you just weak because you have iron poor blood, but your immune response is weak as well. It's dependent on iron. It's dependent on Heru Behudet Bena operating through your system. So before we go forward, let me ask if there are any questions on that. Okay. Okay. So we're going to look at one of the major texts in Akan culture when they're talking about the creation of the world, because the title of Heru Behudet, as well as Bena, as well as Abena, Sekhmet, in Akan culture, is Odwirafo. Now we talked about the title Odwirafo dealing with Abena because Obra means life. Obra is the title of the menses, the menstrual cycle. Women going through the menstrual cycle are called Odwirafo, but Odwirafo also has another connotation. Odwirafo in Akan culture are also the people of the Obra, which in plural is MMARA, which means the law. So in English that would be considered the police, the people who uphold the order. And in our culture, the Odwirafo uphold the divine order. Now, just like Sekhmet is called Sechima in Akan, which is Sekhmet in ancient Kemet, she's called Abena and Abra. We talked about her title being Abraba or Abra, which is just a contraction of Abena becomes Abra. In Akan as well, you have Bena, males who are born on Benada are called Kwa Bena, just like females born on Benada or Abenada are called Bena. That means our Akra is governed by that particular divinity. That means before we incarnated, when we were drawn up to Inyame wa Inyame, they put these particular Abosom over our Akra to govern our Akra. And we were sent into the world and born on their day as a significator of what happened in the spirit realm. So people born on Benada in our Akan culture, if it's a male, it's Abena. If it's a female, if it's a male, it's Kwa Bena. If it's a female, it's Abena. Kwa Bena is also spelled in some dialects and pronounced Ko Bena. Kwa, K-W-A, is from K-O-A, Akwa, which means a servant in this particular connotation. So Kwa Bena, just like Kwa Fi or Kofi or Kwao or Kwesi or Kwajo or Kojo, that means a servant of or a subject of. So Kwa Bena means the person born on that day is an Akwa, a servant of Bena or Kwa Bena. Some people pronounce it Ko Bena. Some people further contract it from Ko Bena to Ko Bra or Kwa Bra. Now that's important because there's a particular drum text, and it's just one of many, but this is one that's often printed, talking about the fashioning of the world. They talk about Odomankoma, who in Akan culture is actually the divinity Atem Kopa, and we have an article about Odomankoma Atemu Kopa, which is Atem Kepra in ancient Kemet. He's one of the divinities. He is not the supreme being. That's one of the things we talk about in the article. Inyamewa, and Inyame is the supreme being. Inyankompon and Inyankonton is Ra and Rayet. Odomankoma is Atem Kepra. He's a functionary of the supreme being, but he is not the supreme being. So they talk about Odomankoma fashioning the world. They talk about Ptah, Bore Bore, Obuadie, which is Ptah, sometimes called Bode, fashioning the world. And they say at the beginning of the world when they began to fashion, and if you remember from our earliest sessions, we talked about Inyame bringing the great being. They created and directed Ra and Ra'at to go out and create the world, just like you can direct your life force energy to move throughout your system and create a child. They created Ra and Ra'at and sent them out to create the universe. And we talked about how Ptah takes the energy given by Ra and Ra'at and fashions the planets, fashions the sun, fashions the earth, fashions the mountains, and so forth. We also talked a little bit about Atem, who is the finisher, who completes the fashioning that Ptah begins. And then Atem's wife is Asase, his two Asases, Asase Nebet-Pet, and Asase Nebet-Hetepet. So you have Atem, Asase, and another Asase. In Akan culture, that's Odomankoma, Asase Afuya, which is the earth mother, and Asase Ya, which is another earth mother divinity. So when you have, you have that whole breakdown, Odomankoma fashioning the universe, Ptah fashioning the universe, Odomankoma or Atem completing that fashioning process. And in the text it says, when fashioning the universe, it says he fashioned the Esain, he fashioned the Chedema, he fashioned the Odwirafo. This is at the beginning of creation. And then after that, other creations were fashioned. The Esain, that means the herald or the messenger in Akan culture. So they talk about the Esain being the first to be fashioned. That's like a messenger. When you see in an Akan court, you see, for example, if an Oheni, a king, is sitting on his Gwa, his throne, you see the Ocheame standing next to him with a staff, with an Mpoma, that's like Tahuti, standing next to Osara sitting on the throne. And then you have an Esain, who is a messenger. So whatever decree comes from the Oheni and is repeated by the Ocheame, the spokesperson who's standing next to him with that staff, then the Esain takes that message and then he leaves the court, leaves the palace, the Ahemfie, and he goes all throughout the Oman, the nation, giving the message to the people. That's the Anansi, that's the Kweku Anansi, that's the messenger. Eshu in the Yoruba tradition. So the Esain, the herald, is sent forth to announce the coming of the Oheni. The Esain is sent forth for a number of different reasons. He's the messenger, or she's the messenger. So when they talk about the Esain being created first, then after the Esain, the Chedema, or the divine drummer, and then after the Chedema, the Odwirafo, the executioner, the great divine executioner. Now, often in text talking about Akan culture, they'll just say, well, the Esain just represents order because the Esain is the messenger. The Esain goes out and gives a message of the sovereign to all the people to let them know what the order is going to be and to regulate order. The drummer has the knowledge of the entire a custodian of the entire lore and laws and so forth of the entire Oman. And we're talking about the talking drummer. So when they drum, they speak with their hands. They speak with the drum. The dono or the talking drum speaks, so they can transmit what the Oheni and Ohema, the king and queen mother, what their decrees are over long distances through drumming, because people understand the talking drum. They can communicate messages that way, and they also maintain order through that system. And then the last is the Odwirafo, which is the executioner, also the police, the one who maintains order, male and female, and they maintain order. So most texts, when they're explaining that, they'll just say, well, these are the different aspects of an Oman, an Akan nation. The messenger, putting the message out, the drummer maintaining jurisprudence and sound governance, and then you have the Odwirafo, who defends the nation. In reality, these are different divinities. When they say at the beginning of the world, when things were being fashioned, first the Asain or the messenger was fashioned, second the Chedema or the drummer was fashioned, and third the Odwirafo. There's a couple things that's important. The Odwirafo, the divine executioner, male and female, the Odwirafo Titere, the great one, they say, called Odwirafo Kwesi, the great Odwirafo, is the third creation or fashioning decreed by the Supreme Being. The agent and agentess of divine hate are so important that the third creation of the Supreme Being, from the decree of the Supreme Being, is the divine hate. So that's critical. The Asain, as the messenger being created first, is like the nervous system in the body being created first. When a fetus is developing, the nervous system is created first. That's the messenger. Second, we say that the Chedema, or the drummer that regulates order in society and manages governance in society because of their knowledge of all laws and rules and regulations in society, the drum is created first. That is the cardiovascular system, that's the heart. The heart is the drummer, that's Heru, that's Yao, that's Shango and Hevioso. So first you have the nervous system being created, then you have the cardiovascular system developing and the heartbeat beginning to beat. And then the Odwirafo, the executioner, the one who maintains divine order, male and female. That's the third creation. Yes, the Odwirafo maintains order or enforces divine order through execution, through destroying the enemies, but your body's immune system develops after the nervous system and the cardiovascular system. So it's a replica of what's happening in the body. We structured our societies based on that, because what's happening in the body is a reflection of what's happening in creation, because these same divinities that govern, these same Abosom that govern the different systems in the body also govern those same systems in the great divine body. So the Asain, the messenger, is Awuku, Anansi, and female Akwia or Akua. In Yoruba that would be Eshu, and the wife of Eshu is Agberu, which most people don't hear about because they focus so much on Eshu, on Elegba or Alagbara. So Awuku and Akua and Akan, who we're going to start talking about them next week. The Chedema is Ya, which is Heru, and also Ya, which is Wachet. They work together, and also Nekabet as well. And then you also have the Odwirafo Titere, which is Abena and Bena. So that's a replication of the physiological structure of the Afurai human being. The Oman, or the nation, is established in the same way. We have the Asain, we have messengers, we have the divine drummers who regulate order in society through sending out the messages and the laws and so forth through the drumming that permeates all of the entire Oman. We also have executioners. We have Odwirafo. We have quote-unquote police, but people who enforce order. Once people get outside of the parameters of divine order and they must be executed, we have those people in place just like the divine body has those in place. The title, which is, there was controversy sometimes created by the Odwirafo about what the translation of the Odwirafo, or the divine executioner, in the ancient Akan text was. They would often call it Kawu Kwabrafo, and they'll just say the chief executioner. The actual translation is not simply the chief executioner. Kwabrafo is a contraction of Kwa Bena Fo, and it's Kwa Bena Fo Oditire, or Oditire. The lion in the Asante dialect, the word Jata means lion, but one of the appellations of the Jata, of the lion, is Seremse Kwa Benafo Oditire. Seremse just means the great father, great powerful father in the grass, because they would see the Jata, Jata Nini, Jata Bere, Jata Foro, the lions and lionesses and the lion cubs in the grass, but they saw the lion, the Jata, as the most powerful, one of the most powerful animals. They would call him the great father within the grass, but then they also called him Kwa Benafo Oditire. Kwa Benafo Oditire means the eater of the head, or the taker of the head, the executioner, the divine executioner. And Kwa Benafo, of course, naming him after the Kwabrafo or Obrafo, but also being named after Kwa Bena, being named after Bena. So when you look in ancient Kemet, you will see the Heru Behudet in the text of Edfu, or Jeba. You will see, yes, he takes on the form of a hawk-headed divinity wearing a red and white crown, and right next to him is Heru, son of Alsar and Alset, wearing the white and the red crown. So they are there together, showing again that these are two separate divinities. But they also take the form at some point in the text of lions. So they're lions wearing the crowns, and they're fighting and tearing apart the enemies. Just like Heru Behudet, or Heru Bedet in ancient Kemet, and Kanit takes the form of a lion. He's also called Kwa Benafo, the executioner, takes the form of a lion, and the lion itself is called Kwa Benafo because of that. Okay, so let's see if anybody has any questions on that so far. Okay, I'm gonna get a drink of water right quick. Okay, no questions on that so far. All right, so basically we wanted to go over, and all of this information is in the articles on the Akradinbosom page and on the NANASOM page in the MMARA series, parts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, Divine Law and Divine Hate, parts 1 through 5, and then the Akradinbosom page. Let me type that in just for people who don't have it. Okay, Sister Aminette, how you say, where do you ask questions? Just type the questions in, and it'll pop up. And here's the site. I'm just typing in the place where you can find the information. Okay. Okay, so if you go to the Akradinbosom page, you can find an article on Bena. And also, if you go to the AKANFO NANASOM page, well, actually, you can go to the AKANFO NANASOM page, but you can also go to the NANASOM page, and you can get the entire article series, Divine Law and Divine Hate. Okay, and I'll just put that in there. All right. So, Bena, you know, Benada is Tuesday. He operates through the planet Bena. He's the divine executioner. He's the male aspect of divine hate, where the female aspect of divine hate is Abena. He's also the Abosom of hot metal, of iron, of war, of protection. The agent of divine hate, he's called Gu or Gufo. That's the same as Ogun, the metal caster, the same as Ogun in Yoruba, Ogu in Vodun, and so forth. Herakuti is also a title. The major lion image is not only in the text of Heru of Edfu Ajeba, but the largest lion sculpture of Heru Behudet is actually the Shesep in Ankh, which they call the Sphinx, but it's called Shesep in Ankh. That is now sometimes people say Horamakit or Heru of the Aket of the horizon, but that's another statue or sculpture of the lion form of Heru Behudet. Okay. Does somebody sister have a question? All right. Okay, so understanding that he operates through the divine immune system, rejecting disorder and all of its purveyors, only functions in harmony with created entities. Now, we talked about this before, and when you look in the articles, we often italicize the term created entities. None of the Abosom, again, operate. No Orisha, no Abosom, no Vodou, no Arusi, no Ntoru or Ntorotu, no divinities, no Neteru, Netetu. None of them work with the whites and their offspring. That means white Asians, white Europeans, white Hindus, white pseudo-Native Americans. None of these individuals. They never have, never will. Neither do the NANASOM and Samanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors of Afuraka. They do not communicate with, nor do they operate through the whites and their offspring. So when you understand the contractive pole of divine order, you're talking about divine hate, the rejection of disorder, for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of divine order. Abena and Bena. So that means not only physiologically rejecting cells, cancerous cells and other invading microbes, it also means culturally, it also means socially, it also means spiritually, on every level, rejecting disorder and its purveyors. So that gets into our cosmology. Some people say, well, how can you maintain divine hate and divine love? When we talked about divine love, which is divine law, living in harmony with divine order with respect to an object or deed or entity, when you're engaged in a lawful, harmonious relationship, then law and love is the same concept. And that's not dealing with sensuality. That's the domain of Afi and Amen. We're talking about law, living in harmony with the law. At the same time, some people say, how do you function within divine hate? Because hate is draining, hate is heavy, it disconnects you from reality, it's an emotion. All of that is foolishness. It comes directly from the whites and their offspring. Deliberately, they understand that hate, Ket, Heru, Heri, Ket. Heru, the chief of Ket, or hate. That's Heru Behudet's one of his titles. Heru Keti, Heru, the one who hates. Set Ket, which means the causer or bringer of hate, a title of Sekhmet. That's one of her titles. These are the Abosom of hate. So if you're living in harmony with the Abosom, divine order, the embodiments of divine order, then it can't be heavy, it can't be stressful, it's not just an emotion, it's a divinity. Hate is a divinity. Just like law, we understand that Ma'a and Ma'at, they are Abosom of law and balance. We need to understand that they are Abosom of hate. So if you're really in tune with the Abosom of hate, and really understand them and invoke them, we don't just read about them, we don't just say prayers to them, we don't just write poems about them, we invoke them, we communicate with them, They possess during ritual. They come through dreams. They come through intuitions. They come speak through the NANASOM, they speak through children. They come through Achinebois, which are animal totems. These Abosom communicate with us. They communicate through us. So when you're really dealing with these Abosom, and all Afurakani, Afurakaiti people have an Akra, have a soul, which is the vast majority of our people, unless they're criminals or child molesters or something like that, we communicate with the Abosom. They communicate with us. We just have to understand that communication and deepen that connection, that communication. But when you're really dealing with Abosom, then you understand that there are Abosom of hate, and the foolishness that hate is an emotion goes out the window. That is that's a form of propaganda waged by the whites and their offspring, particularly in so-called humanist, pseudo-humanist philosophies and psychology and pseudo-New Age spirituality. For those people who have rejected Christianity, rejected Islam, rejected Judaism or Hinduism and stuff like that, people in our community who are at least intelligent enough to reject all those fake religions and their fake, false prophets and characters, because all of the characters, whether it's Jesus, Yeshua, Isa, Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Judah, Solomon, Sheba, Menelik, all of these characters are absolutely fictional. They never existed of any race whatsoever. Some of us got some good information and we rejected that foolishness. But then we're still looking for something spiritual. So a lot of our people move into psychology, or they move into some form of some pseudo metaphysics, some pseudo esotericism like Hermeticism or Gnosticism or things like that. Or they look to the East. They look to Jainism, and they look to Hinduism, they look to Vedanta, they look at some form, they try to manufacture a new black Buddhism and try to make it ancient, which is foolish. They look at Taoism and things like that. They look at martial arts. Our people look at a number of different things. The ones mainly in the West who are trying to look at things that they believe is a more objective view, they start reading things about psychology. Some of our people get degrees in psychology. Some people become licensed professional counselors. They become therapists. They get certified in various forms of therapy. Some of them believe that they're engaged in an Afrocentric approach to psychology, an Afrocentric approach to therapy. Over the past 30 plus years, there's a lot of material that's been published, being referred to as African-centered approaches to psychology. Some of it has some elements, and a lot of it does not. A lot of our people had a Eurocentric mindset, even though they had the, good intent, but they were using a Eurocentric mindset to approach ancestral religion. And because they were tainted with that Eurocentric mindset, the things that the Europeans told them were not good, they rejected and said that had nothing to do with our spirituality. And the things that they were taught and ingrained in their minds by Europeans that were good enough, then they expanded upon those. So they began to engage in foolish talk like the Abosom are just archetypes, the Abosom are just symbols, they just represent principles. We believe in monotheism, foolishness like that, because they never rejected the false culture of the Europeans. So you have psychologists, you have therapists, you have pseudo-New Age spiritualists who are decked out in ancestral, clothing and jargon, talking about hate is just an emotion and it's just emotional, and if you engage in that, then that disrupts you and redirects you away from your focus. These are individuals who don't understand the culture. If you understand there's a difference between love and lust. Lust is misguided desire. We talked about this last week. It's a misguided desire to be drawn or control something that's not natural. Law is to live in harmony with order. So law and love is the same thing. Lust is the corruption or the perversion of love or law. Many people understand that principle. We have to understand that there's also a difference between hate, which is divine, the divine destruction of disorder for the purpose of maintaining the integrity of divine order, the immune system, Heru Behudet, Sekhmet, Bena and Abana. There's a difference between hate and malice. And malice is just what we call in Akan culture Adwini Boni, which means an evil intent. Malice is an evil intent to pervert or destroy. So malice is the perversion of hate. When you're engaged in malice, you're not rejecting disorder for the purpose of maintaining the divine order. You're engaged in promoting disorder. If you're malicious or you have adwini boni or evil intent, you're trying to destroy the order. You're not trying to uphold or enforce the order, you're trying to destroy the order. So, for example, some people say, well, and we mentioned this before, slavery was about the whites and their offspring hating us. No, the whites and their offspring have malice. They have an evil intent. Hate, they can't even embrace hate because remember, hate is an abosom, a male and female abosom. They can't embrace Abena or Bena. They can't communicate with Heru Behudet and Sekhmet. If the whites and their offspring were able to embrace divine hate, that means they would embrace the divine mechanism that would destroy all disorder and its purveyors, which means the Achiwadifo, or spirit of disorder, whites and their offspring, who embrace divine hate, they would just kill themselves because they would take themselves, spirits of disorder, out of creation. None of them are doing that because they're not interested in supporting order. If they were interested in supporting order, they would eliminate themselves. That would be their contribution to supporting order, is their total annihilation. If they're not focused on that, they're not helping at all. They're promoting disorder. So they can't embrace the spirits of order. They can't embrace hate because hate is their destruction. They can't embrace the spirits whose function is to operate through us so that we can eradicate them. It's not possible for them to do that. They don't have an Okra either, so they can't communicate with any Abosom, but definitely not the Abosom of hate. The same thing with love or law. They cannot embrace law or love. They can't embrace Ma'a and Ma'at because they can't communicate with Ma'a and Ma'at. So they can operate on lust and malice, a misguided desire. So when they enslaved us, that was a desire to go from where they were, thousands of miles away, uninvited, to where we were, and drag us against our will. That's a lust, a misguided desire or attraction towards a group of people that didn't want to have anything to do with them, but they still kept forcing themselves on us. If we escaped the plantations, then or the distilleries, they would attempt to drag us back to them. That's a misguided lust or a misguided desire or attraction to draw somebody to you who doesn't want to have anything to do with you. That's predatory. That's not love. That's not law. An attraction in and of itself is not an expression of love. It can be an expression of lust. It's a misguided or perverse attraction, an unnatural attraction. It's like a child molester has an unnatural attraction. It's not a natural attraction to children. Now, and same thing with dissexuals or homosexuals. That's not a natural attraction. That's a perversity. That's a spiritual discordance. That's a psychopathic attraction. It's not natural. Although some Negroes will try to say that it's normal. So they can't embrace law because they can't embrace order. They cannot embrace hate because they can't embrace order. So that wipes out all the whites, their offspring. They can't embrace any divinity, so they can't embrace law or hate, love or hate. They operate through lust and malice. Now for us, when we embrace their culture, we operate on the same perverse frequency. So instead of operating in harmony with law, we have a sick or misguided attraction to disorder as opposed to an attraction to order. Instead of operating through hate or rejecting disorder and its purveyors, if we already have an unnatural attraction to disorder and its purveyors because we've been conditioned to be attracted to things that are actually poisonous to us, then we will have an attraction to the enemy and we will reject that which is good for us. It's no different than somebody who's addicted to heroin or crack cocaine. Once they put that drug in their system and they force the chemical within their system and force their body to accept it, then at first their body rejects it. It makes them sick. Their body is trying to expel it. But then they're waging war against their own body by continuously forcing the chemical in their body, and it forces a hybridization to occur within the cells, and now the cells begin to crave the chemical that's actually destructive to the person. So now, instead of some people who are hooked on drugs and it's very extensive, they'll reject food, they'll reject sleep, they just want the drug. Things that they could actually eat or drink that would normally make them better, they can't even keep them down. And it's very similar when somebody has a virus. The foods and the liquids that normally would nourish your body, you try to take them in and then your body expels them. You regurgitate whatever you took in. So your body begins to reject that which is actually naturally good for you. When you have been inculcated with lust or perverse desire towards disorder, then you have an attraction towards disorder, and when it's time for you to embrace hate, you can't embrace hate because you don't want to reject that which you've been attracted to, what you've been conditioned to be attracted to. So that makes you angry. On the other side, if you have a sick lust or perverse desire to be drawn to spirits of disorder, which all of the whites and our offspring are defined, they incarnate as spirits of disorder. They're not spirits of disorder just because they engage in some disorder every now and then. They are spirits who do not have an akra, don't have a ka or kaet, an ori, a se. They don't have a divine soul, a divine consciousness. So they are spirits of disorder. They incarnate that way, and that's what they're going to be until they become extinct, until we make them extinct. So if you have a sick attraction to spirits of disorder, and then you want them to operate in a certain way, to treat you in a certain way, and then they don't treat you in the way that you want them to treat you, then that develops frustration. And that frustration leads to stress. And that stress can lead to anger. It can also lead to disease. So you have a misguided attraction to disorder, which develops into frustration when they don't operate the way you want them to. That leads to stress. That can lead to disease. That can lead to anger. That can lead to all the things that the psychologists, the black psychologists who are misguided and believe that they're teaching something intelligent when they're not. That's what they're talking about when they say hate limits you, hate is destructive, hate weakens you. It has nothing to do with hate. These are people who are engaged in a foolish pursuit to get spirits of disorder to treat them in an orderly fashion. So they're already on the lust frequency. They're also sometimes on a malice frequency, but typically they're on a lust frequency. They've been conditioned to embrace disorder. Just like some of our people were conditioned to look at the so-called slave master as the child of quote-unquote God, or look at the white fictional character Jesus. There wasn't a black Jesus either, but they put that image of a white fictional character on the wall, and if we didn't feel like we measured up, which of course we wouldn't because we're not crackers, then we would have a self-defeating, self-hating, self-denigrating mindset from that point on. And we would want, even though we believed that we were inferior, we still wanted the so-called superior class to treat us with some respect or with some dignity or with some quote-unquote love, which would really be for them lust. And when they didn't do that, that would upset us because we had expectations that were foolish because we were associating them with certain qualities that they didn't have. If you have hate, if you embrace Bena and Abena, just like when your body supports the immune system. All of your systems, the majority of your systems are not the immune system. You have digestive, respiratory, endocrine, integumentary, you have the excretory system, you have a number of different systems, but the immune system is a minority in the body, but that's the system that destroys disorder, cancerous cells, and so forth. And all the other systems, although they are not immune system cells, they support the immune system functions. When we embrace divine hate, you're connected to all of the Abosom. You may not be a child specifically, your Akra may not be governed by Bena or Abena, but these are divine organs within the divine body of the Supreme Being, just like all of your organs are interconnected. So you do have a connection to all of the Abosom, just like your body is connected to all of the different organs. You may have one particular abosom that governs your akra, that you're more connected to than all the others, but you're related to all of them. And when you need protection, and when you need divine order to be enforced, it is through Abena and Benada that takes place. When you attune yourself to rejecting disorder, you're attuning yourself to the abosom of divine hate, Bena and Abena. If you don't do that, then you're on the lust and or malice frequency. So when psychologists are trying to teach us that we shouldn't be hating, what they're actually saying is we shouldn't be embracing divine order. We should be trying to embrace disorder, or we should be trying to ignore order because we don't want to upset the foolish doctrines that the whites and their offspring imposed upon us. And that's foolishness. And we kind of go into detail about that whole notion of operating within Inyame wa Inyame Chi, divine hate, throughout the course of your regular everyday life in part 4 of the MMARA Nechi series. So let me, somebody had a question. Okay. Okay, sister asked, does the name Egypt called Ta Meri really mean the land of law, since Meri is love and law is the same? Okay, it depends on the determinative. When you're looking at the Medutu, the hieroglyphic writings, and you can download hieroglyphic dictionaries, and what we always suggest is when you download a hieroglyphic dictionary, no matter which one it is, or there are a number of them out there, we also use the languages of traditional Afuraikai, which are direct descendants and modern or contemporary expressions of the ancient language. So for example, the Akan language, the Yoruba language, the Ebe language, language of the Bakongo, these languages are cognate languages for the language of ancient Kemet and Kanit, or Nubia, Egypt and Nubia. So when you're reading through these grammar texts and so forth, they don't often understand the pronunciations of terms, and they don't often understand the cosmology associated or multi-layered, multi-tiered explanations of what some of these terms mean, because as far as they're concerned, they don't have a living language. They're trying to reconstruct the language of ancient Kemet through texts, and they don't really understand, outside of having some clues from Coptic and from some other languages in the region, which are just corruptions like Arabic and so forth. They don't really have an understanding. But when you look at the actual descendants of the culture, we migrated to the west, central, and south, and then eventually we were taken from the west, central, and southern parts of Afuraikai to the western hemisphere, north, central, and south, Amaroka and the Caribbean and Europe. But we migrated and we took the language with us. So you can look at an Akan dictionary, you can look at a Kikongo dictionary, you can look at an Eve or Fongbe, Evegbe or Fongbe dictionary, and let the languages, and you will find the actual pronunciations of terms. You will find the same deities by the same names, with the same descriptive titles, with the same functions in creation, and so forth. So when you look at a term like Ta Meri, and you look at what it deals with, in the first or now I think it was the second session we did on NANASOM Ne Amamre, which is ancestral religion and culture, and it's on our YouTube page, youtube.com/Odwirafo. We touched on that because we were talking about the NANASOM, the ancestresses and ancestors. When you look at the determinative medut, or symbol at the end of a word, you can have meri or mer, which means love or desire in the sense of desire. You can also have mer in the sense of law, but then you also, when you're looking at Kemet, a title of Kemet meaning the land of Meri, and of course Ta Meri meaning the land of Mary. Of course here in America that means Maryland or Maryland, and some people have seen that in Maryland and Virginia and DC are all in the same region. So Virginia and Maryland is the Virgin Maryland that comes from Ta Mary. But the Mary portion, the determinative of a lake of water, that talks about where Ta Mary comes from. There are two divinities, female divinities, Merit, Shema, and Merit, Met. So Meri is the male, Merit with the T is the female. Merit Shema is Merit of the south. Merit Met is Merit of the north. These are the Abosom, Orisha, the goddesses of the inundation of the river, of the Hapi. So when the river inundates, it's called Merit very often. And there are two different divinities, just like there are two Hapi divinities. There's Hapi of the north and Hapi of the south, twin divinities. Hapi of the south is called Hap Reset, or Hapi of the south. And Hapi of the north is called Hap Met, or Hapi of the north. And you'll see sometimes both Hapi divinities. One is holding with a semi-medut, and they're holding the plants. One is holding the plant of the north, and one is holding the plant to the south, and they're intertwined around the semi-medut. And you'll see both of the Hapi divinities standing there. And we have that picture actually in our Kuku Tum Ancestral Jurisdiction book, which is on the Odwirafo website. So sometimes Merit Shema and Merit Met are married to Hapi Met and Hapi Reset. And by the way, Hap Met, or Hap of the north, also understand that Mu is a term for water. So Mu Hap Met is the waters Mu of Hap Met, of the northern Nile divinity. That's where they get Muhammad or Muhammad from. And we talk about that in the Kuku Tum. But Merit Shema and Merit Met are the goddesses of the inundation, the female Abosom of the inundation. When the water rises at a certain point in the year and overruns the banks, it creates inundation, a tremendous lake, about 600 miles long, and in some places 10, 12 miles wide. The whole country, it appears, has been inundated with the flood waters. That Merit means inundation. It covers and just, submerges everything. So it's a representation of the underworld in a sense. So that's why you'll have the term Mer, Merit, and Mer, meaning the dead one, or the dead, and the Meru, the dead people. And the pyramids are called Meru because they are shrines for the deceased, for the dead. Now, when we look at ancient Kemet, we would say, oh man, this is the land of the pyramids because that's the most prominent structure you would see, and it is. But the pyramids were for the deceased, so they were called Meru because they're for the deceased, and the deceased were actually called Meru, meaning the dead ones. And Merit meant the inundation, when everything went dead or went into the underworld for a certain period. And then after a number of months in the sacred calendar, then the sprouts would come up, and then that was a new season, and then people would come out eventually because that would be the Akat season. And when the Per season came, people would come out, the waters would recede, the black silt would be up and down the banks of the river, and people could plant and eventually have a good harvest. But when the waters would come, that was the end of a cycle. So that's why Meri and Meni means the dead one. Menu or Meru means the dead people. Meri means the inundation, and that was one of the most important times of the years when everything was going back to what appeared to be the original time of the Septepi. Because the Septepi meant at the beginning of the world, before the first mound rose up out of the surface of the water, when everything was covered with water. They call that the Septepi, or the first time. And then when we talk about this in the cosmology, Ra and Ra'et move through the primordial earth. They cause earthquakes on the ocean floor. The first primordial mound rises up. It's called Ka and Kayet. And then Ra and Ra'et move through that Ka and Kayet. and they become Afura and Afurai Kayet. So that's where you get Afuraka and Afurai Kayet Africa from. But before that, when the water submerges everything and it returns to what is similar to the Zep Tepi, or the first time when everything is covered with water, that's a time of death, but it's a time of regeneration. It's the beginning period of regeneration. So when we would see the death process, we didn't see that as a curse or something evil or all this other foolishness. We saw that as sacred. So when Alsar dies, Alsar is mummified, Alsar becomes the sovereign of the ancestral realm and so forth. We didn't see the death process. Death was a gateway to another phase of life. So life was not the opposite of death. Birth is the opposite of death. So you're born through the gate of birth, you live in the physical world, you go through the gate of death, and you live in the spirit realm, and then you reincarnate through the gate of birth, and you live in the physical realm. But life is continuous through both realms, but you have Awo, birth, and Owu, death, that are two gateways. And when you go through that gateway of death, you go into the spirit realm, and that's a sacred phase of life, just like operating in the physical realm is a sacred phase of life. So when we would say Ta Meri, or the land of the inundation, that was just a title, just like Kamit is a title. Kam meaning black, Kamet meaning the black country, Kamal meaning the black people. It's like the deserts on the side of, on the banks of Kamet. It was called Desher, a Desheru, and Desheret, and that's where we get desert from, and that's the red land, and the Desheru are the red people. What we're talking about is dark brown people with red undertones for the Desheru, or dark brown people with black undertones, which is the Kamal. All of us are dark brown people, black people, but they had red undertones, like you would see the Maasai warriors, for example. If you look at some of the Maasai, some of the other groups, they're dark brown black people, but they have red undertones. Then you look at some other people, like some Dinka, or even some Wolof, or some other groups, they're dark brown black people with black undertones. That's the difference between the Kamal and the Desheru. It wasn't that there were red people and black people. There were black people, some had red undertones, some had black undertones. It wasn't just based, it was partially dealing with the land, because the people living in those desert areas, they were connected to those Abosom, and that colored the nature of their life force energy, and that produces those red undertones or those black undertones. So, but all that to say, and that's all connected to the cosmology, but the Meri meant the inundation. It meant the period where everything was going under, meaning underground, underworld, spirit realm, going back to the semblance of the Septepi and preparing for a new birth. So it wasn't necessary, it wouldn't be, in that sense, the land of the law. You have to look at the determinative medut to determine what, what's being spoken of. Okay. All right. So now, the brother asked about, can one become immortal energy and remember their past lives and materialize in the physical world? Well, let me see. You're saying if they can. Okay, Yeni Aseda, sister. You're saying, can they become immortal energy and remember their past? You can remember your past life now, just like you can remember when you were younger. Through ritual practice, you can remember your past life. Through dreams, often your Kra or the Abosom or your Nsamafo will show you what was going on in previous lifetimes, just like you can remember what was happening when you were a child. All of your experiences are embedded, encoded within your Abatum, which is just the term that we use for melanin, but it's encoded in the Abatum. Yes, encoded in the DNA, but the Abatum is where it's encoded in. Your Abatum, or your quote-unquote melanin, is just a portion of the great Abatum, the great Ka and Kayat, the black substance of space within which all the stars, planets, suns, moons, and everything resides, is within which Nu and Nut and Hehu and Hehut and Ka and Kayat, these divinities, operate. So you have a portion of that within your body. And all of your experiences are encoded with that. If you have a negative experience, positive experience, any energetic interaction, it's encoded within your Abatum, just like the memory in your computer records all the different transactions you deal with on the computer. So even when you pass on, when you have children, you pass on that DNA, you pass on those characteristics to the progeny, so they can tap into that. But you also have an ancestral memory that's connected to your Kra, your soul. It's embedded in your Kra, just like the Abatum, the melanin, the blackness, it culminates up into the head where the pituitary gland is and so forth, but it is the seat of the Kra, seat of the Ka and Kayat. So everything is connected to the Kra. So you can remember past lives. Many people do that. They learn things about what's happened in the past. They use that for information for the present right now to avoid negative situations and so forth. Okay, there was one question. The sister asked about the Tamari. Look at the article on the origin of the term Nsamanfo in Kemet, and then look at and that's on the website. And then you also, which goes into more detail, and then also the video NANASOM Ne Amamre Part 2, when we're talking about the Nsamanfo, the ancestresses and ancestors, because we go in detail about Merit and Mir and so forth. Okay, now the brother asked about can you become physically immortal? Is that true through your research? Now, there are a lot of things. There are a lot of things that people are going to say. We're not designed to be physically immortal. That's not part of the design. It's not the design of plant life. It's not the design of different animal life. That's not part of our Krabi. When you understand our cosmology and you connect with your Kra, that's critical, and you connect with your Nsamanfo, or connecting with your Kra, which is your direct connection to the Supreme Being, you're also connecting with your Nkrabeya and your Nkra, your divine function. Your soul, your Kra, carries the Nkrabeya and the Nkra, your function that you're to execute in the world. If you're an immune system cell in the great divine body of the Supreme Being, then you have that function. If you're a circulatory cell, you have that function. So you have a Nkrabeya, you have a function, and encoded within that function has to do with how long you will live your life, and you can cut that short by going against your Akra. You can engage in self-destructive behavior, and you could have lived a much longer life, but then if somebody was doing drugs or something like that and they cut their lives short and so forth. But it's not part of the Akra of us as Afurakani, Afuraikaini human beings to be immortal. That's not part of it. The only time you hear people talking about that, black people talking about that, is when you have black people who have been talking or reading things from white people. It's the same thing with extraterrestrials, atomic wars in ancient Kemet. The only people who talk about that are black people who've been studying with or from white people or publications of white people. And that includes people on the continent. You have people on the continent, fake priests and priestesses, who have no connection to any Abosom, no connection to any Orisha, haven't had a connection for centuries because they've just been engaged in lower level, what we call lower level so-called witchcraft, but they've just been dealing with deceased, wayward, unevolved, uncultivated spirits of their dead relatives and passing these spirits off as divinities and just feeding not law and hate, but feeding lust and malice. So they're operating similar to the Odwirafo, to the whites and their offspring, on lust and malice. And when people have low self-esteem and they have, desires of grandeur and delusions of grandeur and desires to be something that they're really not, but because they don't really understand who they are, they look for, different kinds of, they have aspirations that have been planted into them by the whites and their offspring. They start looking for any kind of publication that has to do with, something sensational. So some of these priests and priestesses on the continent, as well as the people here who have been initiated by those people, or been initiated by people here, they've been reading these white New Age books. They've been reading Hermeticism and Gnosticism and reading books about Eastern so-called pseudo-philosophy. And they began to make these claims because that makes people who have been colonized mentally, that makes them feel good. If you've been colonized like that, that gives you a charge. It's like a drug. Like, oh, you'll hear people saying that death is not a natural process. We're not supposed to die if we understand, who we are spiritually. We live. That's pure foolishness. The only black people who say that kind of foolishness are black people who've been influenced by white people, by spirits of disorder. No truly conscious Afro-Akani person who's actually in connection with the forces that govern creation, which all of us have that connection, but we just don't tend to utilize that. But nobody who has a connection for real will talk that foolishness. But you have people who've been, all you have to do is do a little background check on anybody who gives you that kind of information. And you will find that they've been studying from white publications, they've been taking on that information, or they've studied under Negroes from the continent who've been influenced by the whites and their offspring, who have an agenda to try to make money off of people, to try to generate, fame and fortune and so forth. But once you do the work with your ancestresses and ancestors and your own Okra and the Abosom, the Orisha, who are connected to your family by blood, who we carried with us through the Musu Okese, through the so-called Ma'afa, through the enslavement period, these Abosom who have never left us no matter where we have gone on earth, you connect directly with them because you have a direct connection with them. Then you're connecting with the Supreme Being and you'll have real information. And that's, it's become popular because the people who are marketeers, the people who are, criminal and also the ignorant, they're the ones very often who jump out and begin to publish and teach and so forth. And the people who've been doing real work often don't do the kind of publishing and teaching, and some of us have to, it's kind of a bitter pill to swallow, have to sit down and do these kind of publications and teachings to try to get this information out because other people have been trying to exploit our people for a long time. So, but when you do the actual spiritual work, you can cut through all of that. Anybody who's, floating information about the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, the Dhammapadas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Hermetic texts, all of these different things, then they don't have proper information. Anybody who's a Hebrew or Moor, Nubian, NOI, 5%er, anybody who's connected to all these different groups, that they don't have proper information. They haven't been introduced to accurate information, or if they were introduced, it was just rejected because they had been controlled by the doctrine that somebody gave to them. Now, most of the people involved in those groups, somebody just gave them some information, or they came up on it on the website, or they ran into some people. It sounded better than the Christianity or the stuff that they were raised with. It made more sense compared to the foolishness that most of us were raised with, some form of Christianity or white so-called humanism or Islam, or how they're trying to promote, homosexuality and other foolishness like that. So when you get some information that's different, it seems like it's important. If the person that gave it to you was trustworthy, was a good person, then you go along with the information. So most people in those organizations just don't know. But then you have the people who are running those organizations who are just liars. They're lying to people. They know the information is false, but they want to control people. They want to make money off of people, and so forth. So you have to do your own spiritual work with your own nsamanfo, your own spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors, not just any ancestresses and ancestors, not just any person in your family who made their transition. There's a difference between NANASOM nsamanfo, as we talked about before, and just the regular nsamanfo. There's a difference between the spiritually cultivated and those who just passed on. Okay. Okay, the sister asks, what language books would you suggest to learn pronunciations of the Egyptian? Let me give you one site, for example, which is just an online, an online dictionary. Okay, so there's an online dictionary, casahoro.org, and you can also get to it, I believe, through casahoro.com, and it's an online dictionary for Afurakani, Afurakaini, or African languages. So they have Akan, they have Ebe, they have Yoruba, they have Phone, I believe they have Swahili, which is at base. Swahili is a Bantu language, even though there are a lot of loan words from Arabic and Portuguese and English and some other languages, but at base it's a Bantu language with some corruption sprinkled in there. But they have a number of different languages there, and then they also have resources to other other sites that you can get direct information from. You can also go on archive.org and you can download dictionaries of grammar, like the Tree dictionaries, Yoruba dictionaries, Siluba, like the Luba language, which is another Bantu language. Different ones. Some of them are older, some of them are newer. But again, in fact, you may want to, when you're doing your spiritual work and you connect with your nsamanfo, see which group you're more drawn to, because they will give you what ancestral clan you are from, and then you'll be more drawn to that particular language group anyway. But starting off, if you want to, you can look at Akan, look at Kikongo, look at Yoruba, and you'll find those different pronunciations that you find in the Medutu. Okay, so we had there's a little conversation going on down here. Okay, so even though we addressed most of this just previously, but brother asked about white people surpassing us in technology and weaponry. Technology and weaponry has nothing to do with the occult. It has nothing to do with aliens. It's not like if you learn something, you can't develop intelligence yourself, so it must be an alien or it must be some occult. George Washington Carver, look at his repertoire. Look at his all the different products, hundreds and hundreds of products he developed. And what he would tell people is, where did he get his knowledge from? It wasn't because he was the first Afurakani man to graduate from one of the universities in the Midwest. It was because he said he got up every morning around 4 o'clock in the morning or so, and he would go out into nature and he would communicate with the plant life and mineral life in nature. And then they would give him everything he needed to produce everything he produced. So, and we've always done that. We communicate with the spirit, just like you communicate with a dog or a cat. You teach them to sit up and roll over and so forth. They are spirits living through, fashion spirit, fashion physical bodies. You can communicate with the life in plants. And when you communicate with the life in plants, you learn the laws that undergird the development of the plants. Communicate with mineral life, you can learn the laws that undergird the sustenance of their life, and then you can learn how to craft compounds, chemical compounds, metallurgical compounds, to develop machinery, to develop medicines, to develop chemical and biological warfare for the enemy, whatever you need. Now, when you look at the different technologies, we have to look at things true historically. Even during, and we mentioned this in one of the first webcasts, when the whites and their offspring invaded Africa, they didn't just come in and wage war against us and win. They've been trying to do that for thousands of years. They didn't take control over most of Africa until the late 12,800s or the 1800s, 1880s, 1890s, and then they began to lose control politically about 50 or 60 years later when the different countries started gaining their independence. During that time, for example, when the British were waging war against the Asante Empire, when they had entered into a coalition with some other Afro-Akani groups in the area, yes, they had weapons, they had guns, for example, but the Asante were manufacturing guns as well. It was just the fact that the British had more at the time, so it was easier to purchase some than try to manufacture them while you're in the midst of a war. But they were manufacturing guns. The gun itself was a creation of our people before Europeans got it. When you look at all these technological advances in America, you'll find that we were right there creating these advances. We very often didn't get the credit. You look at, for example, the PC that was created by a black Afro-Akani man in America. When you look at the internet, one of the fathers of the internet, they would say one of the fathers, but in reality, the father of the internet is a brother Philip Emeagwali from Nigeria. So just the fact that we're on a PC using the internet, that comes from our people. When you read what Philip Emeagwali said about his approach to, discovering different things, he would talk about recalling the cosmology of his people from Nigeria and applying those principles to science and discovering new things. It didn't have anything to do with him studying the occult. It had nothing to do with him contacting mythological aliens. The whole alien extraterrestrial thing, again, is only people who talk about that is black people who've been communicating with white people. And of course, the whites and their offspring know all of it is foolishness, but for that percentage of our people who have rejected Christianity and Islam and the major fake religions, they knew everybody wasn't going to jump on that. They would get the majority of our people, for example, in America, to become Christians and believe in a fictional white deity who they're waiting on to save them. Some of our people weren't going for that. The majority went, over 50%, but some of our people didn't go for that. So they would give them a little, Christianity light. So they would give them Islam. They would let them have Hebrewism, make them feel like they're doing something. Or they'll give them a fictional black Jesus, a Yeshua, to make them feel like they're doing something. They're still trapped in foolishness, something that's totally inaccurate, but it just makes them feel like they're doing something. They're still controlling them, but they believe that they're in control of themselves. It's like somebody going from, smoking heroin or smoking crack and leaving that alone and moving to heroin, thinking that they've changed their life, and in reality they're still hooked on a drug. So some of our people weren't going for the, Islam and the Hebrewism and the other stuff, the Moorishism, all of these things, whether it's the Nation of Islam, Moorish Science Temple, many different Hebrew groups, all of these groups, the Nubians, all these groups were founded by the whites and their offspring. And they have black agents who put the information out and propagandize the foolishness for the control of the black population. And the higher ups in the organization and the strident supporters, they know it's foolishness, but they keep going along with it. And then the people who come in on the entry level, they just, they think it's something that they should be into because they don't know any better. So, but any group that's dealing with extraterrestrialism and stuff like that, if you trace where they get the information from, they've always either been studied under some Odwirafo, whites and their offspring, studied from the whites and their offspring publications, or they've been influenced by the whites and their offspring. No other group. If you don't have that influence, you won't find that anywhere. And when you do the real spiritual work, you know it's not true. Okay, so sister asks, how do you find out which clan you're part of? Do you need to be initiated? And that's a good question. No, you don't need to be initiated. And even though some people do proper initiations and things like that, a lot of the people are doing bogus initiations. Some of them are doing them deliberately, bogus, taking money from people. But the majority of the bogus initiations are not because people are trying to be bogus. They just have misinformation because they've been initiated by people on the continent who've been corrupted by Islam and Christianity and white culture for hundreds of years. And they brought those corruptions, and it's not just Yoruba, it's in Akan, it's in different groups. But your connection with your ancestresses and ancestors is the same connection that you have with your mother and your father and your grandparents, because your ancestresses and ancestors are just your direct blood relatives. So just like you can ask your mother what city you were born in, ask your father what city you were born in, ask your grandparents what was happening when you were growing up, your ancestresses and ancestors, your NANASOM and Samanfo, they will give you the information about what specific ancestral clan you come from, because that's part of their job. They will do that, and they want you to know that information. They'll give it to you through dreams, they'll give it to you through meditation, they'll give it to you through ritual prayer, possession, whatever format they come through, they will give you that information. So we have a couple of articles. Look on the link that we put up there, the AKANFO NANASOM page. And when you go through that page, near the bottom, you'll find the Nkomre Ancestral Shrine Communication article. You'll find the Nsamai Kom and the Seven Senses article. You also find the Nsamai Komre Ancestral Shrines article. So we go into detail about the nature and function of an ancestral shrine, how to establish an ancestral shrine, and the kind of information that you can get directly from your Nsamanfo. Learning your identity is, that's part of who you are. You don't have to get initiated for that. Initiation in the real sense is if you have a particular Nkrabeya or divine function to serve as a vessel of an Abosom, of an Orisha, of a Vodou, in the human, meaning Afurakani, Afuraikaitni only sphere, because we're only talking about our people. If just to be a vessel for one of those Abosom's energy to manifest in our community, then you can get initiated. Initiation takes different forms. The very first black people who were initiated to work with the Abosom, they didn't have priests and priestesses to initiate them because they were the first ones. So how did it happen? The Abosom or the Risha would possess and communicate directly with them and give them that information. Just like they possess at authentic rituals and cause people to dance, but also do divination and so forth. They possess our people and communicate. They still communicate with us. One of the major ways is through dreams and through ancestral shrine communication. So check out those articles, and you'll find the nature and function of a shrine, of an Nkomre, how to establish one, and how to start that communication process. And they will definitely give you the information, and they will give you details specifically that regard to the clan that you're from that's different from other clans. They'll give you a specific peculiar ritual practices or specific combinations of animal totems or whatever that are specific to your clan that are different from the other clans, just to show you which specific clan you come from. They'll speak to you in the language in your dreams or at the shrine or during meditation or during ritual practice or whatever. They will give you the information. Okay. All right, so any more questions on that? Any more questions on, I know we got off into some of the information about divine hidden the questions, but any more questions on Bena? We went over his function, the planet he operates through, how he operates in the body, how he operates in the iron portion, in the core of Earth, the necessity of iron with regard to immunity, and that's why he's an iron divinity. dealing with divine immune response in creation. We talked about how he's the principal agent of divine hate, while Abena Sekhmet is the principal agentess, with a female aspect of divine hate. If you hear anybody, no matter who they are, whether they're a priest, priestess, psychologist, spiritualist, metaphysician, and so forth, telling you that hate is a lower vibration, hate is, anything negative about that, you understand that they're just misinformed. And the vast majority of our people have not done the spiritual work. All you have to do is ask them or find out, do the research, where did they get their information from? And beyond what they say on the surface, it always goes directly back to the whites and their offspring. It's not coming from the Orisha, it's not coming from the Abosom, it's not coming from their ancestresses and ancestors. It's coming from the whites and their offspring. They're trying to blacken up pseudo-metaphysical dogma from the whites and their offspring and passing it off as ancient Kemetic or ancient Afurakani or ancient universal wisdom, and it's not true. All you have to do is look at what your Nsamafo give you, look at the culture that you come from, or look at any culture in Afuraka, Afurakai, and then you can compare that to what is carved in stone in ancient Kemet, and you will find it's an unbroken continuum of what our cosmology is, how we function, what our interaction with the Abosom are, what our interaction with the Nsamafo are, what our interaction with life, just plant life, animal life, mineral life, period, and the spirit realm, and you'll understand that none of that includes any foolishness about reptilians and atomic wars and all that other foolishness. Okay, there's one more question. The brother said, people can turn into animals, but we can't become immortal. When they talk about people turning into, they're not turning into physical animals. They're not just turning into a physical, when they say shape-shifting and things like that. A spirit can, just like an Abosom can possess you, an Abosom can possess, a person can possess somebody. A deceased ancestral spirit can possess somebody. A deceased ancestral spirit can, influence an animal, just like a deceased ancestral spirit can possess somebody and make them dance and fall and cry and do all this other stuff. And then there's also the other aspect of it where in the spirit realm you can take on different forms spiritually, but they're not changing their physiology. They're not turning themselves physiologically into a leopard, into an osebo or a lion. They can do things spiritually in the spirit realm, and if you can see them spiritually, they can change form, just like you can change form in dreams. It's more fluid in the spirit realm, but they're not literally physically shape-shifting into an animal. That's not what's going on. So, and the whole notion of, immortality, your spirit, your sum, it is immortal. Your kra is immortal. Your physical body is not designed to be immortal. It's not necessary. There's a reason we have cycles. So again, that kind of information always points back. If you do the research, it only comes from the whites and their offspring who have the desire to always be outside of the natural order. They don't want to have anything to do with Ma'at and Ma'at. They are spirits of disorder, so they always incorporate and attempt to inject dogma that has nothing to do with Ma'at and Ma'at. It's always outside of the parameters of Ma'at and Ma'at, and they try to force that into our culture. Okay. Okay, one more question. Somebody asked, can you not call on a family member that was once a Jehovah's Witness? Okay. So it depends. When you're dealing with the Nkomere, when you're dealing with an ancestral shrine, typically what we're doing when we're evoking, so you evoke the ancestral spirits, you invoke the Abosom, but when you're evoking the ancestral spirits, you're typically evoking the NANASOM Nsamafo. That's the Akan name for it. There's Egungun in the Yoruba tradition. In ancient Kemet, they're different titles. The Aku, or Akutu, meaning the enlightened or illuminated ones, the shining ones, and so forth. That's a title for the Nsamafo. Shepsu and Shepsitu is another title for these ancestral spirits. But you're evoking the ones who are spiritually cultivated. So that's why we have that nomenclature. We have NANASOM Nsamafo as opposed to just Nsamafo. You can have Nsamafo Pa, which means good, Pa, Nsamafo. You can have Nsamafo Bani. Bani means evil. So Nsamafo Bani means the evil or disordered deceased. By the way, Bani in Akan, you have the same word Bani in ancient Kemet, which means evil. So that's another linguistic connection. So you don't just say, like in English, I honor my ancestors. No, you don't do that. You honor those who are honorable, and you don't honor the ones who are not honorable. So you can sometimes you can include, when you're pouring libation during Oshwie, and you're evoking your NANASOM Nsamafo, and if you don't know the names of them, say for example in our Akhan tradition, and we have this in the Nkomere article, so I'm just going over it quickly, but it's detailed there. If you're pouring libation, you don't know the names of any of your NANASOM Nsamafo, then you would just say the NANASOM Nsamafo. That's the whole group of spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors. But you never include on the Nsamafo Bani, you never include them at all. If you have an ancestral spirit that's a nice person, one of the Nsamafo Pa, but they weren't spiritually cultivated, you can include their name in the sense of an Oshwie, in the sense of honoring them, but when you're communicating, the reason you have an Nkomre is not just to pour libation, give them some food, and then it's just a symbolic gesture. The reason you set up a shrine and you do the Oshwie, you do the libation, and you give offerings, is because after you do that, you've invited them to come into your dwelling, and then you sit down and you listen and communicate with them, just like you invite your grandparents over your house, and you may give them some food, give them something to drink. Once they're comfortable, then you sit down and you talk. And once you're finished, talking, then that's the end of the session. So you may invite, or you may, honor in the process, just like you could talk to some grandparents, you may mention your aunt or mention somebody else in the context of a conversation out of respect for the person. But for somebody who's not cultivated, that's not the reason you have an ancestral shrine. You're communicating with your NANASOM Nsamafo. So you're not looking to somebody who was not cultivated, who wasn't focused for advice. Now they may give you if they were a nice person and they made their transition to Asamando, to the ancestral realm, and of course automatically, as soon as they make that transition, they automatically realize a couple of things. One, everything that they were taught in that Jehovah's Witness foolishness is total foolishness, because there's no Jehovah, no Yahweh, no Yahweh, none of those pseudo-patriarchs. They just realized that they spent a good portion of their life dealing with some foolishness. Now some of them make a smoother transition to the ancestral realm, and they accept the fact that they were lied to. Some of them become earthbound, they're emotional, they're not developed, and they'll have those negative emotions. You'll pick up on them because they're not cultivated, and they're kind of latching on to you. So it depends on what kind of spirit that person was. At most, you would acknowledge them, but your focus is the NANASOM Nsamafo, to get direct communication and direct guidance from the spiritually cultivated ones, because that's part of their Nkrabia. When you become one of the NANASOM Nsamafo, if you become an elder, spiritually cultivated elder, while you're here, you develop yourself, and by the time you reach that age, you're spiritually cultivated, you're in harmony with Inyamewa, Inyame, and Sheshe consistently, then when you make your transition, you become one of the NANASOM Nsamafo. You transition into that office. And part of the collective Nkrabeya, or collective function of the NANASOM Nsamafo, the Egungun, the Aku, or Akutu, is to assist the other cells in the divine body with their development and their nourishment and their protection. That's part of their function. So that's one of the reasons why they want you to know who you are. So they will give you, your ancestral identity. They will inform you of that. That's also why you don't focus on you don't have a focus on the non-cultivated spirits, because they still have to develop. Once they made their transition there, they're trying to develop and get back in harmony with order in the spirit realm. They're living in the spirit realm, just like, the Akan have a proverb that basically says, if you want to know what Asamando, what the ancestral realm is like, consider the dream state, because it's very similar. Your body is laying in a dark room with no sound and no movement, but your spirit is communicating with others. You're having dreams, you're communicating with other entities, you're having experiences. And it's similar in the after death state. Your body is in the ground, but your spirit is communicating with others. And those who made that transition, they're living amongst their, other ancestral spirits who have passed on as well. But then you have NANASOM and Samafo. Part of their function is to assist us in our development. And the ones who haven't gotten to that point, they're still trying to work on their own development, so they may not have the best advice for you. So our focus is the NANASOM and Samafo. Okay. Okay, and one last thing that Konton Kurowi said is important. Is it very important to use an Afurakaini language when praying? Now, we do have a sample prayer in the article, in the Nkomre article. We also, on our Ning site, let me give you the Ning address. It's a network. Okay. We also, it's afuraka.ning.com. We also posted a prayer in the language of ancient Kemet, ancient Kani. Just a sample prayer that just addresses Amen, Amenet, Ra Raet, Ka Kayet, the major Abosom, and the Akutu, something very similar that you can use as a libation prayer or a meditation, but a libation prayer. So if you, of course, most people haven't studied the language, so that's a very simple prayer that you can repeat. You can read it out loud until you memorize it yourself. And then later on, you can, when you get copies of texts, and you can download these different texts for free on many different sites, where the actual language is, you have the words in the language, then you have the transliteration and the translation. So you have the Medutu, the actual symbols. You have the transliteration, which is the translation in the language of Kemet, and then you have the translation in English. But then when you get a text like that, you can get a dictionary like an Akan dictionary or a Kikongo dictionary, and then you can make the comparisons of the different words from ancient Kemet to our contemporary dialects, so you can get the proper pronunciations and a deeper meaning. Okay. Okay, so we're going to stop it here. Next week, the next session, we'll be talking about Awuku, which is the Abosom of Awukuda, which is Wednesday, the planet Awuku, which is Mercury, which is Awuku Akweku Anansi, and Akan Anansi Kokroko, the great Anansi, and called Eshu in Yoruba, and Legba in Vodun. So, Medase, for checking us out. We're going to have this video posted on the YouTube site, on the Odwirafo site on YouTube. So, Medase.